Educational Psychology, Cognition and Learning in the Classroom. Behavioral Views of Learning. Imagine you're a new student in school. You have some expectations about how things should be in class. You hope you will enjoy the class and that you will like your teacher. In this video segment, we will look at the behavioral views of learning and how these views may fit into the classroom. Behavioral views define learning as a relatively long-lasting change in observable behavior that results from stimuli in the environment. Thoughts and beliefs were not included in this definition because they could only be inferred by the observer and therefore did not meet the scientific standards for observation. It was this focus on observable behavior that enabled researchers to use animals rather than humans for a large part of their research. A fundamental aspect of the behavioral view is that of classical conditioning. Here, learning occurs through association. When an unconditioned stimulus, like food, touches the tongue, an automatic, unconditioned response of mouthwatering occurs. This is a natural biological occurrence, and so to the behaviorist, no learning has taken place. Learning occurs when the response is associated with a new, neutral stimulus. It was first observed around the turn of the 20th century when Ivan Pavlov was conducting physiological research on digestion. He wanted to know how much salivation occurred during the digestion process and conducted experiments that measured the amount of saliva a dog produced while eating. Soon Pavlov noticed that the dog began salivating even at times when no food was presented. Just the sight of the lab technician or even the sound of his footsteps was enough to trigger salivation. He then began varying the stimuli to see what else could be used to produce the reaction. Lights, bells, and even metronomes could, after a while, produce the same biological response. It didn't matter what the stimulus was, only that it reliably signaled that food was on the way. Learning through association is a very powerful tool and is a mainstay of advertising. It doesn't matter what the product is, only that it is paired with an image that produces a desirable physiological response. Test anxiety is an example in the classroom that may often be explained as classical conditioning. If a student is repeatedly criticized for test performance, those feelings the student gets from being criticized will over time become associated with merely the act of taking a test. Classical conditioning explains how involuntary physiological and emotional reactions may be associated with unconditioned stimuli, but people and animals often initiate behaviors which are not the result of stimuli. They operate on their own in ways that change their environment, and depending on the consequences of their actions, they will learn if the action is worth doing again. Behaviorists call this kind of learning operant conditioning. Skinner explored the form of learning that occurs when voluntary behaviors are shaped by manipulating the consequences of those actions. Pigeons are genetically programmed for pecking. It happens naturally and does not have to be taught. The box, which is now called a Skinner box, is designed to present food whenever the pigeon happens to peck on the red dot. After a time, the pigeon learns that the red dot is the only place that produces food and pecks there exclusively. Sometimes the concepts used can be confusing, and it may be helpful to detail the 4 quadrants of operant conditioning. First, consequences will either reinforce a behavior, making it more likely to occur, or they will punish the behavior, making it less likely to occur. If I go to a restaurant and have a pleasurable experience every time I go, I will be more likely to return. The consequence of my dining experience reinforced my dining behavior at that restaurant. Conversely, if I go to a restaurant and repeatedly have unpleasant experiences, I will be less likely to return. Behavioral psychologists also make a distinction if the consequence is being presented or being taken away. When either a good or bad consequence is added, it is called positive, but when it is taken away, it is called negative. Here are a few detailed examples. When a teacher sets up a token economy and gives stickers, check marks, or other tokens for good behavior, these are rewards that reinforce the behavior, and because they are added, they are called positive reinforcers. If the teacher takes away tokens for bad behavior, this reduces the frequency of the bad behavior, and because the tokens are taken away, this is called removal punishment or negative punishment. The negative here means that the punishment is a result of taking something good away. For another example, if a teacher wants to discourage her students from asking to take tests late, she might increase the difficulty of the test. This is an aversive condition that is intended to reduce late test-taking behavior, and because it is imposed or added, it is called presentation punishment. Finally, if a student feels anxious and stressed about taking a test, he may find that when he spends more time studying the material, some of the anxiety is reduced. Future studying is therefore reinforced because the feeling of anxiety is taken away. This is called negative reinforcement. This deserves repeating because it is so often used incorrectly. Negative reinforcement removes an undesirable condition which reinforces a behavior.
A couple of wavy lines. Sorry, this isn't your lucky day. I know. What are you trying to prove here anyway? I'm studying the effect of negative reinforcement on ESP.
No, Dr. Venkman, this is not negative reinforcement. In your experiment, you are presenting a shock that is unpleasant. That makes the consequence a presentation punishment. Operant conditioning is a rich field of psychology, and it is impossible to address all of its facets in this overview. One aspect that deserves mentioning involves shaping behavior by manipulating environmental antecedents before the behavior occurs. In this example, the antecedent of turn or peck determines which behavior will be rewarded, and so learning is refined based on the presentation of the antecedent. Precise control of the consequences after the behavior can shape the learning so that behavior is displayed only at desired times. In this video segment, we have seen how neutral stimuli can be associated with an unconditioned stimulus to produce a predictable response using classical conditioning. We have also seen how behavior can be shaped through the control of consequences using operant conditioning. The suggestion here is not that teachers control and manipulate their students with behavioral technique, but rather for teachers to have a better understanding of what they are doing naturally in the classroom and how they may include more effective technique in their teaching.